I never thought my morning would start with me standing barefoot on my front lawn, wearing an old bathrobe, and holding a half-eaten slice of greasy pizza I just pulled out of my rose bushes. But there I was, squinting into the early sunlight, staring in disbelief at what used to be my perfectly maintained yard. Empty soda cans glistened in the grass like cheap ornaments. Crumpled fast food wrappers fluttered against my garden gnome. And right there by the walkway, as if to drive the insult home, was a sagging, waterlogged diaper oozing something I didn't dare inspect. My first thought was maybe raccoons, maybe some unlucky wildlife had torn through someone's trash and dragged it over. But then I noticed it. A faint trail of footprints pressed into the soft dirt, leading from the far edge of my property. My eyes followed that trail, and my stomach dropped. The prints led straight from my neighbor Karen's yard. I should have known. Karen was the kind of person who made complaining an Olympic sport. My lawn was too green, obviously suspicious. My fence wasn't freshly painted, disgraceful. The wind chimes on my porch. She said they gave her headaches and threatened to report them for noise pollution. She was the neighborhood tyrant in pearls and tennis shoes. But this? Tossing garbage into my yard? That was a new level of spite. I stared at the mess, feeling my blood pressure climb. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't random, and it wasn't accidental. This was sabotage. I could have marched over to her house right then and there, but instead, I took a deep breath, went inside, grabbed a pair of old gardening gloves, and started cleaning up. Every crumpled napkin I picked up made me mutter under my breath. Every sticky soda can shoved into the trash bag made me curse Karen's name. I told myself it was probably a one-off, maybe an accident, even though I knew better. But when I woke up the next morning and looked out my window, my stomach twisted into a knot. My yard was trashed again. This time, it was worse. Scattered cereal boxes, crushed beer cans, and right there on the front lawn was an empty box with Karen's address label stuck to the side like a signature. That was it. My patience snapped like a dry twig. I stormed across the street with the trash bag slung over my shoulder and pounded on her door. She opened it with that smug smile that made me want to scream. "Good morning, Ethan," she chirped, as if she hadn't just turned my yard into a landfill. I shook the bag in front of her face. "I think you lost something." Her smile only grew sharper. "Oh dear, maybe the wind carried it." "The wind," I repeated, my voice tight. "The wind conveniently deposited your cereal boxes, burrito wrappers, and dirty paper towels across my flower beds?" "I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about," she said sweetly, and before I could respond, she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned. Then I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I woke up hoping maybe that confrontation had been enough to end things. Maybe Karen would feel a little embarrassed, maybe she'd finally leave me alone. But when I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee in hand, I nearly dropped it. My yard wasn't just trashed, it looked like a garbage truck had exploded. Rotting banana peels sagged from my rose bushes. Broken eggshells crunched beneath my shoes. A takeout container, half filled with something foul and sour-smelling, sat in the middle of my walkway like a gift. My stomach churned, but not from the smell. It was rage. She wasn't done. She was doubling down. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning up again, but this time I wasn't muttering under my breath, I was making plans. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was going to catch her. That afternoon, I ordered a motion-activated security camera and set it up in the tree overlooking my yard. I angled it perfectly, facing the fence that separated our properties. The moment I finished, I felt a flicker of hope. The waiting began. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me sit up and check the monitor. And then, around 2 a.m., there she was. Karen, in her pink bathrobe and hair curlers, creeping across the lawn with a trash bag in hand. I watched her in real time, hurling garbage over the fence with the grace of a drunk quarterback. I should have been furious, but I couldn't help laughing at the absurdity. Still, laughter didn't last long. By sunrise, I had printed still shots of the footage and walked straight to the HOA president's house. He looked tired, but when I showed him the pictures, his eyebrows shot up. He sighed heavily and promised he'd handle it. The next 2 mornings passed without incident, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But Karen wasn't the type to quit. Instead, she got smarter. I started noticing side glances from my neighbors. Conversations would stop when I approached. Mrs. Whitaker, who used to wave at me from her garden every morning, suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. I brushed it off at first, but then the whispers started. Someone told the guy across the street that I was the one tossing trash in my own yard for attention. Someone else mentioned that I was a compulsive hoarder who had garbage piling up inside my house. It didn't take a genius to figure out who started those rumors. Karen was turning the neighborhood against me, and it was working. The final blow came when I found a sign planted right in the middle of my lawn in bold, block letters, "Clean up your ACT." I ripped it out of the ground and hurled it into the trash bin, my hands shaking. But 2 days later, there were 2 more signs. One read "Honk if you smell garbage," and the other, "Yard sale, free trash included." Cars honked as they passed, and from across the street, I heard Karen's shrill laughter echoing like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't just sit there and take it. I spent that night brainstorming, and by morning, I had my plan. If Karen wanted to humiliate me in front of the neighborhood, I'd return the favor. I spent the entire afternoon building ridiculous trash monster mannequins for my lawn, one with a soda can crown, another wrapped in plastic bags, all standing beneath a massive cardboard sign that read Karen's Royal Trash Kingdom. By noon, the entire neighborhood was out taking pictures, laughing, and whispering. But not at me, at her. I watched from my porch as Karen stormed across my lawn, face red and fists clenched. "You think this is funny?" she shrieked. I crossed my arms and met her glare with a calm stare. "Honestly?" "Yeah, I do." Her nostrils flared. "You're pathetic," she spat. "This neighborhood used to be respectable until you started acting like a lunatic." "Oh, so the signs you planted were respectable?" I shot back. "I didn't put those up," she lied effortlessly. "Right," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "They just appeared like magic." She jabbed a finger in my face, her voice rising. "You're going to regret this, Ethan. When the HOA hears about this, you're finished." "Go ahead," I said, smiling coldly. "Tell them. I'll show them the footage of you sneaking around my yard." She faltered for just a second, her eyes flashing with panic before hardening again. "You think you're clever," she hissed, "but you're only making things worse for yourself." I watched her stomp back across my lawn, but something told me this war was just beginning. I thought maybe, just maybe, after the spectacle of the trash monsters, Karen would finally back down. But the next morning, I found a thick envelope from the HOA shoved into my mailbox. Inside were multiple violation notices. Noise complaints, reports of unauthorized construction on my property, and, most absurdly, an accusation that I was harboring an aggressive dog. I didn't even own a pet. I stared at the letters in disbelief, my heart pounding with frustration. Karen wasn't just harassing me with trash and signs anymore, she was trying to weaponize the HOA against me. I knew I needed proof. That night, I set my security cameras to record continuously, focusing not just on the yard but on my back porch and side fences. 2 nights later, the footage caught her again. Karen was sneaking into my backyard, carrying a small speaker. She set it up under my deck, programmed it to blast loud music on a timer, right when I wasn't even home. The next day, another noise violation letter arrived. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. But Karen wasn't finished. One afternoon, I overheard two neighbors chatting in hushed tones at the end of my driveway. When they noticed me, they went silent and shuffled away awkwardly. Later, I learned why. Karen had been going door to door with a clipboard in hand, smiling sweetly, telling everyone she was collecting signatures for a neighborhood beautification project. But buried in the fine print of her so-called petition was a clause calling for my removal from the community due to chronic disturbances and endangering neighborhood harmony. I found out only after one of my more honest neighbors, embarrassed and furious, slipped me a copy. My blood boiled. Karen wasn't just making my life miserable, she was orchestrating a campaign to force me out. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to understand why she was so relentless. That night, after hours of digging through public records and a little internet sleuthing, I found my answer. Karen had close ties with a realtor named Vince, a man with a reputation for buying up distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. He'd been flipping houses in our neighborhood for years, and guess what? My house sat right next to a vacant lot that had recently been listed. If I left, if Karen could drive me out, Vince could swoop in, buy both properties, and cash in big. Suddenly everything clicked. The trash, the signs, the rumors, it was all part of a larger scheme to pressure me into selling. I wasn't just dealing with a spiteful neighbor, I was up against a calculated, profitable plan. I decided to play them at their own game. The next morning, I put a fake "for sale" sign on my front lawn and stacked some empty moving boxes on my porch. I wanted to bait them into making a move. Sure enough, by that afternoon, Vince showed up. I watched from behind the curtains as he strolled up and down the sidewalk, pausing to inspect my fence line and measure property boundaries on his phone. I didn't confront him, not yet. I wanted more. That night, Karen retaliated harder than ever. She didn't just dump garbage this time, she vandalized my property. Rotten food was smeared across my front porch, trash cans overturned, rancid bags of waste spilling out onto the street. But the worst part? A dead fish, its cloudy eyes staring up at me from inside my mailbox. It was grotesque, intentional, and designed to push me over the edge. I stayed calm. Instead of reacting, I gathered the best still shots from my security cameras, Karen in her bathrobe, struggling to toss a leaking trash bag over my fence, Vince scoping out my yard with a measuring wheel, and Karen wedging that dead fish into my mailbox with a satisfied smirk on her face. The next morning, I printed out dozens of copies and plastered them on telephone poles, bus stops, and community bulletin boards all over the neighborhood. On each flyer, in bold letters, I wrote, "Meet your real neighborhood trash problem." By midday, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Apologies came pouring in. Mrs. Whitaker stopped by with cookies and mumbled that she'd always suspected something was off. Even the HOA president sent me a message thanking me for bringing the truth to light. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift off my chest. But I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her didn't stop until they had nothing left to lose. And judging by the way she glared at me from her porch that evening, I could tell she was about to hit a new low. The morning after my flyers went up, the neighborhood felt like it had shifted. For once, I wasn't the one dodging side eyes or forced smiles. Instead, I caught people giving Karen those looks, whispers followed her wherever she went. But I knew better than to think this was over. Sure enough, 2 days later, another envelope from the HOA arrived. This time, the language was colder, more formal. They were reviewing my residency status due to multiple community complaints, noise disturbances, threatening displays, and creating an unsafe atmosphere. My stomach dropped. Karen had somehow turned the tide again, using forged letters and fake signatures from her door-to-door petition scheme. Even with the truth exposed, she was still fighting dirty, and the HOA was playing right into her hands. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that weekend, and I walked in armed with a flash drive, a folder of printed screenshots, and the determination not to let her win. But the moment I stepped through the doors, I saw her. Karen was surrounded by a small circle of neighbors, whispering like conspirators. She spotted me and instantly switched to her performance mode. She clutched her chest, sighing dramatically, eyes wide with practiced innocence. I could hear her rehearsed lines before she even said them. When the meeting started, the room was tense. Karen spoke first, standing before the HOA board like a martyr. She claimed I had been harassing her for weeks, that I was obsessed, that I'd been stalking her and creating fabricated videos to frame her. She even pulled out a stack of handwritten complaints from other neighbors, full of absurd accusations. One said I left animal carcasses on my own lawn to draw sympathy, another claimed I threatened to poison local pets. The lies were wild, yet her delivery was so polished that I could see some board members hesitating. But then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, plugged in my flash drive, and played the footage. Karen, in her unmistakable pink bathrobe, hurling trash over my fence. Karen smearing rancid food on my porch. Karen stuffing that dead fish into my mailbox, muttering under her breath about how I deserved it. The room fell silent. For a moment, Karen stood frozen, her confident smile faltering. But she recovered quickly and launched into a new lie, her voice cracking perfectly for sympathy. That footage is doctored. She cried. He's been stalking me. He's dangerous. I braced for the worst, but then the HOA president stood up. Karen, he said firmly, we've received several reports from other neighbors who've seen you sneaking onto Ethan's property at night. His voice grew colder. And frankly, if you want to talk about disturbances, we've had more complaints about your little sign campaign than anything else. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to argue, but the president cut her off. I suggest you remove every sign, apologize to the community, and leave Ethan alone. If not, you'll face a formal fine and potential legal action. The meeting ended with Karen storming out, slamming the doors so hard they echoed down the hallway. I should have felt triumphant, but when I returned home, the tension in my gut didn't ease. The next morning confirmed why. My mailbox had been ripped from its post, shattered to pieces in the middle of the street. Spray-painted across the broken wood was one word in red, loser. I didn't even need to wonder. But Karen wasn't done with property damage. She took it further, and this time, it cut deeper. Later that afternoon, my sister called, her voice shaky and confused. Ethan. I just got a message from someone claiming you've been hoarding garbage. That you're unstable? She sounded terrified. My heart sank. Karen had tracked down my family on social media, messaging them from fake accounts, spinning the same lies she told the neighborhood. It was psychological warfare, and it worked. For the first time since this all started, I felt exhausted, like maybe I couldn't win. That night, I found my garage door defaced with dripping red paint, one word, psycho. I stood there staring at it, fists clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. But I didn't retaliate. I took a breath, wiped the paint away the best I could, and downloaded the footage of Karen and Vince sneaking into my yard, paint cans in hand. The next morning, I handed everything over to the police. They didn't need convincing. By afternoon, 2 officers were at Karen's door, escorting both her and Vince to their squad car while the entire neighborhood watched. But as they drove away, her glare through the car window promised one thing: she still wasn't finished. For a few days after Karen and Vince's arrest, the neighborhood finally felt quiet. My yard stayed spotless, the mocking signs were gone, and neighbors who once avoided me now offered small nods or waved as they passed. But I knew better than to relax. Karen wasn't the type to go down without dragging someone with her. Sure enough, it started small. My phone rang at 3 a.m., and when I answered, there was only silence. Packages I never ordered showed up at my door, boxes of cat food, stacks of outdated magazines, even adult diapers. I tried to ignore it, chalk it up to desperation, but then my car was coated in sticky cooking oil. The camera I had pointed at the driveway mysteriously unplugged that night. She was getting smarter, learning from past mistakes. A few days later, I woke to find my porch egged, yolks baking in the sun, the stench clinging to the air. My trash cans vanished and reappeared in the middle of the street, garbage strewn everywhere. Karen wasn't just lashing out, she was trying to break me. I knew if I confronted her, she'd deny everything. So instead, I set one final trap.